All right, we're going live in 5, 4, 3.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, here for another DevOps webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by AppDynamics. Before we begin, I just wanted to briefly go over with you all the GoToWebinar control panel that I hope most of you are seeing in the right-hand corner of your screen. And there's two specific parts of the control panel I want to bring to your attention. The first is marked questions, and you'll see a little arrow or caret next to the word questions. We have set aside time at the end of today's presentation for our guests to answer questions from the audience. However, we don't want you to wait until then to actually ask your question. You can type your question into the question section here, where it will be queued to be answered at the appropriate time. And equally as important, if we have too many questions and we don't have time to answer them all, we will actually have a written record of your question, and we will try to get you an answer, even if we have to after the conclusion of the webinar, via email, or we'll post it on DevOps.com on the page for the webinar so that your questions do get answered. We appreciate the questions and value our audience's participation. So please feel free to type your questions in there in real time. You don't have to wait till the end, and we will get to those as soon as we can. The next thing I wanted to bring to your attention was the chat section at the bottom of the control panel. Here, for chat, we're not really looking for questions from the audience, but more importantly, if you have some sort of technical difficulty, audio not working, slides aren't progressing, or something to that effect, we do have our engineering staff on the back end monitoring the chat window, and they will try to help you if you have any problems there. So hopefully that's really all you need to know, other than, pay attention to the slides and our speaker, and we hope it'll be a great webinar for you. Again, this is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to our webinar. Today's webinar, sponsored by AppDynamics, is entitled Get Complete Visibility into Containers-Based Application Environments. And our guest is Anand, Director, Product Marketing and Strategy at AppDynamics. Anand, welcome to DevOps.com.
Thanks.
Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that, there's probably no topic hotter in IT today than this whole topic around container-based environments, Docker, Kubernetes, Meso, CoreOS, Rocket, what have you. But it seems, everyone is talking about containers and is interested in learning and at somewhere along their way of their container journey, if you will. So I'm sure our audience will have lots of questions and is very interested. And I know I've seen your presentation. I think it's going to be a great learning experience. But before we begin, Anand, just a little background. You're Director of Product Marketing and Strategy at AppDynamics. And do you want to share with the audience just a little bit more about your background or expertise here, or you want to just dive in?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, I'm a Director of Product Marketing and Strategy at AppDynamics, focusing on APM, core APM. And I've been doing that for, more than a year. And then prior to that, I have been kind of doing similar kind of thing at CA APM, again, in application performance management. And in my prior years, I have worked different roles in application management, systems management. So today, the topic of microservices, container monitoring, as you said, it's really hot in market now. I'm going to try to address that from like some of the things that we are doing now, and in general, kind of more of that presentation is educational, and what we'll talk about some of the challenges and how to get visibility, how to get kind of some control over there.
Okay. All right, let's proceed to our next slide then.
All right, so I will move, and so let me kind of get started here. And this is an interesting slide that I saw a few months ago, and I've been using that since then. And this is really interesting to see. If you look at the kind of left-hand bottom corner, there are a set of companies who are not there anymore, and in the right-hand side, top side, if you will, in that half of the screen, you will see companies that are kind of doing pretty good. And what we have noticed, and is that like more than half of Fortune 500 firms since 2000 are gone. And the reason for that is that they really did not innovate. They really did not went ahead with the technology and powered their businesses by software. They did not kind of follow the trend of digitization, and that's why kind of they became the prey of some of the predators that you see here, who really kind of looked at what's going on in the marketplace, looked at the trend, they powered their kind of back office, what kind of changed that to kind of more digital front end. As you could see here, this is one of the survey results that there's massive budget shift to digital. A lot of enterprises, whether they're e-commerce or manufacturing or banking, a lot of work has been done in the past in the back offices with systems like CRM, HRM, ERPs. These are, still kind of those things are still needed, but if you look at this, the budget has moved from like 80% in 2011 to 50%. On the other hand, in this world of digital transformation, when things are kind of moving to digital, it's most important for enterprises or retailers to ensure that customers are getting, their end users, customers are getting the best experience, and they're focusing on systems of engagement, the front end. And you could see that in the shift on the budget from kind of 20% to 50% by 2016. So that's a kind of a trend, interesting trend that we see here. Another kind of based on that trend, like some of the companies like Pearson, they used to be all about textbook education publishing, and they're not no longer kind of really focusing on textbook. Everything is online, and how to kind of do bite-sized information, how to deliver them, how to engage their end consumers. Lloyd's Bank, for example, again, a pretty old bank, their biggest branch, as they said, actually, they presented in one of the conferences where I picked this, and their biggest branch is their mobile app on the 7:15 train when people are going to work. And this is really kind of transformational if you think of the traditional businesses completely being run by software and digitizing. Again, and there are disruptors here like Uber. World's largest taxi company owns no vehicle. They're more of a software company, a data company. They are kind of playing in the data economy, if you will. Similarly, Tesla. So the reason I'm giving you all these examples are that there's a trend that people are moving from kind of focus from spending a lot of budget and focus from the back office to the front end engagement based solutions, and there's a trend there. And again, I showed in my first slide, if you do not if the enterprises are not really following that, then they're becoming basically prey of the predator, and competition kind of goes and takes their lunch away. So what is happening is that as we are as companies are following their digital transformation journey and running more and more of their business components powered by software, things are getting complex out there. People who are in this example, someone who wanted to purchase a flight ticket, it was pretty straightforward in the past. 3-tier architecture, they went to the web page, submitted a web server, app server, and a database. But, as in the last many years, as this software is powering the businesses, it's becoming very, very complex out there. There are too many components, a lot of different disjointed, distributed services connected through web services. There are synchronous transactions and communication between applications, and there are a lot of asynchronous. You just go and request to a web service, and whenever that web service processes your request, get back to you. So how to really get end-to-end visibility in that case is becoming really challenging. And if the goal is still to give your end user the best experience, it is very, very important that you track their entire interaction. We call it business transaction. That if you're trying to purchase a flight or transfer money from the bank, it's really important to have visibility into that completely end-to-end wherever it is going. And what microservices coming in, people are, and I'll talk more about microservices and how and why people are breaking big monolithic applications into smaller services. But as the applications, as we are getting into more and more distributed services, loosely coupled via asynchronous means in most of the cases, it is really important to have visibility into what's going on, what the dependencies are, so that if there is a problem with someone not able to purchase a ticket, or it's taking longer to submit the card, then you really know what's going on, where in the transaction there is a problem, which component is having a problem, and you could really drill down and get to that detail and first isolate it, and once you have isolated the problem, you could resolve it. So in the next few slides, I'll talk more about microservices and some of the things that I've seen in the customers I have been talking with. But before I do that, let's look at a poll. Let me just ask you a question that, how many of you are using more microservices? So let's just give 30 to 45 seconds while to get the responses, and I'll move on to next section. So I have seen in my experience working with customers that a lot of customers are considering it, considering breaking their applications, monolithic large applications into microservices, smaller services, and it looks like half of you are already using it, and rest of you are considering to, you're here because you want to know more about it, so that you see the benefit and how to get control over it and try it. So with that, let me move on to my prepared presentation here. So let me spend like a few minutes on microservices. It's a term, as Ellen said earlier, it's being used a lot. A lot of people are trying to learn about it. I just picked a few definitions. Martin Fowler, who has been I'll be using some of his work, referencing some of his work in upcoming slides as well. But his definition, I really like it, that microservices are an approach to developing a single application as a suite of small connected services. So, monolith application kind of goal to do a certain kind of business transaction, but kind of breaking it into kind of connected, loosely connected suite of small connected services. Adrian Cockcroft, who was at Netflix and now kind of in the venture community world and is expert in this area and DevOps, and many of you have heard and read his work. He says that loosely coupled service-oriented architecture with bounded context. So that's what he thinks that he thinks about microservices. And then there's a Wikipedia definition that I will not necessarily read, and you could look it up. But essentially what people are saying is that it's a small services with smaller footprint, but they are self-sufficient and that they're very, very loosely connected, but kind of as a whole they kind of offer service, a business transaction, if you will, that they deliver. So let me kind of go to this. I really like the graphics that they talk about how the progression, if you will, from monolith to traditional SOA and to microservices world where we are right now. So with monolith, pre-SOA world, everything was tightly coupled, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this. And it was difficult to change, and if you have to change, everyone had to agree, and you had to do like a lot of work to kind of make sure that everything is tested before you could kind of go to the next release or next revision. Then came SOA-based, where things were kind of loosely coupled, and it was easier. Interfaces were clearly defined, so you could still do what you wanted to do in the specific component, but you still had to kind of make sure that it is tested together and things like that. On the other hand, kind of microservices are almost decoupled. I mean, I would say like loosely coupled, and it's self-contained. And and I'll give you a few more examples. But the challenges with monolith that we had, that it really intimidated developers with complexity, longer ramp time. Dev environments were difficult to manage and set up. And it was a long-term language and technology stack commitment. So if you're using Oracle or for that matter any relational database, you have to use that for all different things for which Oracle may not be the right choice, for sessions, for there are multiple things where relational database is not necessarily the right option. But if you are in that world, you have to live with that. But when you come to kind of microservices architecture, that you have a flexibility. I mean, there are services that are easy to replace. Different services could use different programming languages, different databases, different hardware and software environment, and it's pretty easy to kind of replace a service with something, and it is very easy to release and make changes, and kind of in the world of the continuous delivery, that works out really, really well, aligns with the kind of the software life cycle trends that we are following now. So this to kind of give you an example, if there's a e-commerce site, and if you want to kind of break that into microservices, potential microservices could be your front-end components, catalog services, shipping, payments, user profile management, billing, etc. Just to kind of give you an example. So There's another kind of pretty good research that Martin Fowler has actually done and posted on his webpage, and the link is right there. And he kind of talks about Conway's Law, and he says that the software or whatever design that organization comes up with is pretty much like the organizational structure. So if in case of monolith organizations, it's siloed functional team. There's a set of DBAs, set of UI experts, set of middleware specialists, set of business rules professionals, and so it was all kind of siloed, and hence the resultant monolith is basically it's siloed, and it's that's what you got. And what his point is that in case of hang on one second, went too far. Okay. In case of agile organizations, it's the teams are cross-functional. They're self-sufficient. They are they're kind of building their own services, and the organizations are kind of self-sufficient. And in that case, it is showing up in the design patterns that is basically resulting into pretty much similar to microservices. So as we are kind of moving into agile organizations, microservices are a good fit organizationally as well. And I talked about microservices, and I said that it's coming up with pretty interesting data patterns as well. And as I said earlier, that you don't have to kind of really worry about kind of one database and for everything use one big relational database. But in microservices world, since the services could be focused around different components, catalog services or session management could just use, for example, Redis, right? Some of the kind of catalog or inventory management could still potentially use relational databases, and some others could use NoSQL technologies. So data is also kind of becomes very interesting to manage and use the right technologies to serve the needs, and then still kind of be very, very good in performance, as well as using some of the newer technologies and not tied with technology that was good many years ago. So the challenge is what these systems that is what especially with the microservices at this time is that there are not a lot of automation. Automation is fragmented. As the things are becoming distributed, you really need to make sure that you have good visibility into it, and a lot of coordination, a lot of good processes are required to kind of go with that, to get real good value, and ultimately your goal is that you're still giving the best end user experience. So with that, I will kind of just talk just a little bit about Docker, and I'll not spend a lot of time because a lot of you may already know about it. But and then I will get into the challenges that we see, what these environments and how to monitor and what we can do. So very, very quickly, we were in the world of virtualization, hypervisors in the past, where still like the hardware was still common, so that the resources were hardware resources were effectively used by all these virtual machines, where you had the operating systems running on the top of virtual machines. So there was still some overhead because like you had the separate operating systems, and especially for databases and those especially relational databases, I mean those things were kind of giving some overhead. Moving to the kind of world of containers, it's leveraging the binary and libs, and you could package all of them together on the top of an operating system. So it will take advantage of the core operating system. You don't have to have different operating systems and like you had in different virtual machines, and it provides you a lot of tools for development, for registering your APIs, and then kind of managing it. So it's very, very easy to package, easy to run, smaller footprint. You could package it at one place and run anywhere essentially, and it's pretty fast to kind of launch and do iterations and kill it if needed, and move on. So it's very, very flexible, easy to package, easy to run, easy to deploy. It was available on Linux usually, but I think it was earlier this 3.24. The beta for Mac and Windows support was announced. So it's kind of getting into different platforms. You need lesser tools to manage each container. So there are a lot of values out of with Docker. In the next few slides, I'll just talk about the performance, especially when you're looking at overall application performance and delivering the best experience to end user. You need to look at the performance of the infrastructure in addition to the applications as well. So with Docker, you'll see faster boot time, and when compared with hypervisors, reboot time is way faster, and for memory performance it is pretty much kind of at par with bare metal. So which is really, really, really cool for applications and databases running on the Docker environment or in general container environment, because it is not adding any additional a lot of overhead like the virtualization added. So with that, I'm kind of moving into, I just kind of talked about microservices. I talked about the challenges that we see, the trend we see, applications becoming complex, getting loosely coupled. You need to get visibility into it, and then talked about microservices and Docker environment. And before I go and talk about some of the options, here you go, a poll for you. How are you monitoring your microservices and container environment? So are you using APM solutions like AppDynamics, or there are a lot of other solutions out there, or you're using some kind of open source or others. So please write if you're using some other ways of monitoring it. That'll be pretty useful for us. So let's give another 15-20 seconds before we get to the next phase where I'm talking about, I'll be talking about, give you some open source options. What are the different ways people are based on my interaction with some of the customers. And here you go. So 30% are using APM solutions, 23% are using open source, and 50% are using something other. So this is possible that this could be in line with the results that I saw, that 50% are using microservices and 50% are not. So that could be those 47%. So good to know that. Okay, so let's talk about the options that we have for monitoring microservices in the industry. Okay. Sorry, 1 second.
It's okay.
Okay. All right, perfect. So, so let me kind of start with how people are, like the almost 23% of you said that you're using open source options, pretty much in line with the customers that I have been talking with. So there are some tools that people are using, open source options, C-Advisor being one of the key ones that I have heard, kind of more focused around Docker. And then we have ELK stack, that a lot of people are using, but there are lots of moving parts there, and it's kind of more of reactive in nature, that like it only handles log data. So things happen and logged, and based on the log data, you get to figure out what's going on there, which is more of after some problem happens or slowdown happens or failure happens. And then there's Sensu, which which I see that people started to use. It needs like a few different components, RabbitMQ, Redis, etc. But it is only kind of at metric. It does not go for events. What happened at certain time. It can give you kind of metric, but not into kind of tell you about the events. And again, it's when you're really monitoring application performance, you not only need to have the metric, but you need to also know what caused, what changed, what happened there that caused. So what was the event? So set up events, monitoring them, correlating them, and kind of making some sense out of that is important as well. And then there are some other names out there, Spigo being one, but a lot of these are kind of this, again, these options are coming up, and some of them are pretty good for what they do, but like if you're looking for end-to-end visibility, if you're looking at transaction, if you're trying to look at the checkout transaction, and you want to see that why the checkout transaction is slow, and then you really don't get that kind of visibility and correlation end-to-end. So there are other people who are using like some other commercial options. So some of the folks that said they're using APM, so they could be using a stack of APM infrastructure and log analytics to get some meaningful information and actionable insights out of the environment. So could be a combination of Splunk, Sumo Logic for the log part, could be for for APM. They could be using different solutions out there. Neuralink, Dynatrace, Ruxit, there are many of them out there. Or for their systems, for the hardware, they could be using yet another system like Sebon, Genos, Logic. Or they could potentially be using AppDynamics, where it's one unified solution delivered via SaaS or on-premise. Exactly same solution. And I'll talk more about AppDynamics, but these are the commercial options. So I talked about some of the open source options, and here are some of the solutions that I see that people are using to monitor that environment. And I will talk a little bit more about what is happening in the environment when you have multiple tools to monitor. So it looks like today's monitoring environment, even without microservices, it looks pretty much like this. There are multiple tools. There was that teams got for different purposes, and they're just still using those different siloed tools. And with microservices, it is it's still kind of adding more tools to their chest. And for example, they added C-Advisor, the Sensu, and they're still using different tools for monitoring different parts. So it is looking pretty much like that for a transaction, for a business transaction, or for something that the user really wants to do, whether booking a flight or transferring money from down to other, whatever transaction that whatever interaction or goal that the user had for which they're interacting with a mobile or a browser to avail the service, there are multiple components that basically the business transaction is going through, but there are different tools to monitor them at this time. So for example, when checkout transaction is slow, and you hear that, that the customer complained that, hey, it's taking very long for checkout transactions to complete, you go look at siloed tool, your JVM provider could tell you that there could be some JVM performance issues. You could look into your Oracle Enterprise Manager, figure out that there are some queries that are slow, and so on. Different tools will give you different information. But in lack of context into the business transaction, it is very, very difficult to really relate to that these slowness in different components are really causing your checkout transaction to become slow. So that's a big challenge, and that's what we are trying to address here at AppDynamics with a unified monitoring solution which has a single UI, a common data store where data is collected from all different places and modeled and stored in a common environment with a single metric processing engine, event services engine, and there are services on the top of that for alerting, dashboarding, correlation, and a lot of those services are common across all the different modules that we have to do end user monitoring, application performance monitoring, the visibility into server or database, again, kind of from one single tool in context of the business transaction. So anytime we see a user is interacting with a service and trying to do business transaction, we tag it and we trace it throughout the transaction, through the middleware, through the database, through the web services, through the microservices it is passing through, and can keep that end-to-end visibility into that business transaction, and that helps us help customers to isolate if there's any problem because of which the application is going slow, or it has gone down for whatever reason. We can very quickly isolate and go to the code level detail and get you the root cause so that you could go address that. So a kind of a screenshot of the environment, as you can see here, you could clearly see how different services, could be microservices, connected to each other. You see all the data, number of calls between these different services, the average response time. The solid lines are more of synchronous calls, dotted lines are asynchronous calls kind of made to the service bus or queue or web services where you're not necessarily waiting for a response. And we have something called what we call dynamic baselining. By that, what we mean is that you don't have to kind of really depend on static thresholds to see that if the load on the system went beyond certain thing, then you do the alerting. It's all automatic, and based on the historical information, the load or response time, everything is baselined, and kind of we come up with a normal performance for each and every metric. And if there's any deviation, from the normal, then we try to first of all collect troubleshooting information and start telling you, alerting you. So for example, as you can see here in the right hand side, in the transaction scorecard, you see all the scorecard for all the different transactions. And for example, you see transactions are going slow, and then you go troubleshoot them and figure out what's going on. So what this does is that allows you to really, what we call chase the yellow before it turns red and impacts your end customer. So again, the idea is to give the best end user experience, and what microservices, and many of them, and loosely coupled, or sometimes people even call decoupled. It is very, very important to have a complete end-to-end visibility. So give you an example, with tools like AppDynamics, you could kind of visualize how different microservices are connected to each other, how they're consuming or serving other services, how they're come together as a composite service. You could do the visualization, and you could see the performance of each and every microservice very easily. Actually, this is a snapshot of our demo environment, where everything is actually run on the top of all the demos, and the services that we have is running on the top of a Docker environment. But so is actually many of our customers are going in this direction, and you could very, very easily visualize them. So kind of seeing how your services are connected is it's getting the visibility into it is really key. And then you could visually see that if there is kind of slowness anywhere, you will some of these green circles will turn red and yellow and red and so forth, and you will get alerts, and you can go troubleshoot. I will not necessarily kind of go into that detail, but the way we are helping, so you could visualize and you could see the transactions, and you could see the slow transaction, you could get the baselining, but we have Docker monitoring solutions where you could get deep visibility into Docker infrastructure metrics. You could correlate them with the applications that are running on the top of Docker. And again, core functionalities of AppDynamics, and I'll show you in a second, baselining, health rules, all of that are applicable to Docker metrics as well. Pretty cool, out of the box, a dashboard with the extension, which is available now at our application exchange. Connects Docker metrics via the remote API. It could be via the socket or Unix socket, or via TCP, and it uses the API from Docker 1.7 and later. So here's a link if you want to go try it out. You could get that. And this is a kind of screenshot of where I'm showing that you could do the correlation. In this case, there's a web application running on the top of Docker, and you have Docker metrics in green and blue. Actually, this is the network, per minute send and receive bandwidth per, and we are correlating that with calls per minute. Some of this is not visible, but when you look at the slide, you will see that. So this is the application that's running on the top of Docker. So you could correlate them. You could create a dashboard and track them. Create health rules. So basically, do the correlation and get the complete visibility into that environment. Another thing that many of our customers, one of the functionalities that I want to highlight, and again, of course, I'm not going very deep into it, and for that you could go to the website, look at some of the self-service demos, etc. But I want to highlight a functionality, what we call service endpoints. So as you notice that a business transaction, whether it's transaction to search the internet or submit an order or whatever that is made out of multiple components, or could be microservices, that is delivering a certain part. For example, sessions management, catalog service, and some of the things I talked about in case of e-commerce. And if you want to just instead of again, as I talked about some of the organizations, now the cross-functional organizations are becoming self-sufficient and responsible for their own module, their own service, their own microservices. So it becomes important for them to just kind of monitor the SLA of their microservice, and they can do it pretty easily by kind of just focusing on their microservice and tracking the performance of their specific service by kind of building service endpoints for those microservices. So you could get complete end-to-end visibility into business transactions, but if you want to just focus on just your microservice, you can do it very, very easily with service endpoint, and many of the customers would do both. With that, I just kind of wanted to point you towards, our GitHub environment, where there are a lot of example code sitting out there for e-commerce environment. So you could, if you're an AppDynamics customer, you could just kind of try it out, play with it. If you don't have AppDynamics, you could go, try free trial, and then download some of these examples from GitHub, which is completely packaged that you could use and start seeing the value, how Docker and microservices could be deployed, monitored, and get value out of it. That's all I had as far as prepared presentation goes. We could take questions at that time, and you could of course follow me, reach out to me via Twitter. I'm pretty active, or try to keep active, at Akela, or reach out to me via email, and my email is here as well.
Anand, perfect. It's actually right on time, and I'm glad we've saved some room because we do seem to have a lot of questions. Before we even get into the questions, I want to thank you. We spend so much time on the sort of what is microservices and what are containers, where I think the real action is going to be around how do we manage, how do we monitor, how do we automate, how does this fit into the rest of our environment? And so this was a timely and well thought presentation, well needed presentation.
Great.
That being said, so thank you, but let's jump in. Our first question is, someone wanted to get, do a little bit of a deeper dive or more better understand, what are MSA principles?
Okay. Did I use that somewhere in the slide, I guess?
I imagine if they're asking, if not, well, it was a person named Lisa, and yes, it was under the microservices.
There are kind of principles. I mean, you could go look it up on the web page, Google it, and it's a set of principles that people are talking about for kind of best practices for microservice architecture. So MSA is basically kind of microservice architecture, and Martin Fowler started some of the best practices, and there are other practitioners who are writing about it. So it's basically about the microservice architecture, and what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, what's the best practice, what's the best practice to monitor and manage, and how was the best practice to package. So there are a lot of best practices that are being discussed in that community around microservices architecture.
Sure, and let me just add to that, Anand. Martin Fowler is a real resource. He's with ThoughtWorks, and he has his own blog. Strongly recommend you to check out what he's written. There's been a bunch of microservices related articles on both DevOps.com and our sister site, Container Journal, and you might find some good information there. But Anand, to me this screams out, maybe we can work with you and the AppDynamics folks on a good article about some microservices resources that people can go to. And look for that soon coming up on the site.
Yeah.
Next question. I don't know how much you want to answer this one, but is there no open source competitor or analog to AppDynamics in container monitoring, which has transaction tracing, etc.?
I have not seen, someone who does the end-to-end transaction tracing, automatic discovery. I gave you some examples like Senset and Sensu and some of those guys, and they're doing pretty reasonably good in what they're doing. Like they're focusing on Docker and getting some good metric out there. But I have not necessarily seen, that giving open source solution that is focusing on complete end-to-end, looking at end-user monitoring, looking at how, your end user are interacting with the browser when they're kind of initiating a request, or to mobile, and kind of tracing their whole entire sessions through the web server, through the app server, going down to the database, going down to the servers, kind of going to a third-party web services, kind of you need some kind of tagging that kind of goes to the web service because you don't have that becomes a black box, but when it comes out of it, you still could kind of figure out and connect it to your business transaction that being managed. So I have personally not seen, I'm pretty sure that, there are, in the community, there are a lot of smart people out there. Someone may come up with something, but I have personally not seen any that open source solution that does the entire end-to-end with transaction tracing.
Okay. Next question. I assume this is aimed at you. How are you monitoring your microservices in Docker environment?
Right. So, as I kind of showed you, we have all our applications. I mean, let me just kind of go back to the demo example, right? That's something that we do every day, day in, day out. Our, everything is packaged as in Docker. So the applications and the agents are packaged in Docker container that we push out and refresh and things like that. So, like agents sit there in the Docker environment, right? And then after that, it becomes basically like you would do for any application environment. So there's an agent attached to the JVM, attached to whatever is running on the top of Docker, could be a PHP process. And then, so you get application level, metrics and events from there, and then you have you have a way to monitor the Docker infrastructure, right? So you get how many containers are running, what's the memory consumption, what's the CPU consumption, what's the network usage of the Docker container, and you get that information. And then all that information is there in the controller, and you could do the correlation that I showed you, that like calls per minute of the web application, or it could be Microsoft. It could be different, metric that you could correlate with. So after that, it becomes pretty kind of business as usual. You have application level metric and events, and then you have infrastructure, Docker infrastructure metrics, and you could correlate. And that's how we see that we are managing, as well as many of our customers are managing their microservices.
Excellent. Next question. This is a hard one. Anand, in your experience and those of the teams you have led, what is the time frame it takes for a small team, let's say 5 to 10 people, to move their application to containers for the first time?
It's, as you said, this is a hard question because answer is it depends. It depends. How you have done your applications. How you have, is it loosely coupled? Is it like, like can you package all the dependencies of the application quickly into the container? So, it completely depends. So if you are, you have already kind of gone, even without containers, the trend of breaking a monolith into microservices is independent of container, making it easy to deploy them, making it easy to kind of package them for deployment and operations. But As far as the practice of breaking that into smaller, decoupled, self-sufficient microservices is kind of independent. I have many customers who are not using any container technologies. For example, they had Java-based monoliths, and they kind of broke it into smaller services, and they call it microservice, and actually we are even supporting them through a special licensing mechanism and say, okay, if your Java JVM of your microservice is less than the heap size of that is less than a gig, you could run 5 out of 5 of those for kind of same agent price. So basically, you could have 5 microservice license equivalent to a regular JVM monitoring license. So so that's kind of one part. So the first thing is that you need to kind of think about how to kind of get your applications loosely coupled, decoupled, self-sustained, and then if you have that, and if you could package them together on Docker, things after that could be fast. So I mean, I've seen even in our development environment, actually everything is Docker based nowadays, and so anything that's new that is happening, it is happening pretty quick. I mean, it's just a matter of minutes and hours versus when we first started doing it, it was difficult.
Absolutely. All right. Next question's from David. Are you instrumenting the running code to trace business transactions, or are you recreating by some other means?
Yeah, so we are not kind of instrumenting, we are definitely doing the instrumentation on fly at runtime. So you don't have to kind of do any kind of manual instrumentation, code changes, or anything. It's some of that is a technology that many of you may be familiar with. It's called bytecode instrumentation. At the runtime, it basically goes, adds timers, start time, end time. And there are a lot of different other ways that we have added on the top of that. So yes, it's at the runtime. Your application is running at a time. You could basically add agents, and it figures out what's going on, and then it follows the different methods and calls, etc., and kind of goes all the way the calls it is making, and kind of does that what we call tagging. So we tag it at the time of entry into that service, the web service, and then we tag it and then follow it and kind of pass it around all the way to get the end-to-end visibility.
Absolutely. Next question. How do you determine normal? Do you have some predefined metrics to average transactions to determine normal? And if so, is that customizable?
Very, very good question. This is kind of one thing that our customers really love, and it's so the normal is based on historical performance. So there's a default, that you could look at, like 10 days of historical data or like whatever that is. So basically, historical performance, you do some kind of weighted average of that, and so the normal keeps changing. There's no static normal there. So what happens with that is that the performance at kind of the middle of the night, the expectation of that versus kind of at the peak hours, like I give you an example of a bank where like 7:15 is the busiest time when people are on the train, right? So the performance expectation at that time versus like at the time where there's no load could be different. So it completely depends on what the historical performance is, and normal changes. So what happens is that in many kind of older systems, when you put static thresholds, you get into what we call kind of alert storm, because you can't go and keep changing those static limits, the static thresholds, and you get into a lot of alerting. And with the dynamic baselining, that automatically changes normal based on the past behavior, and only alerts, or for that matter, even passes the troubleshooting information across the wire to the controller only in case of there's a deviation from the normal. There's like we decide like 2 standard deviation from the normal. That's when we can start tracking those. And again, if for any business reason, if you want to change that dynamic baselining, which most of our customers don't, if you want to override with static thresholds, you could always do that.
Excellent. Well, Anand, we'd like to be here, but we're at the top of the hour, and I think we're going to have to call it a day. Again, thank you so much for a great webinar today on microservices and containers and monitoring and APM solutions for them. Thanks to AppDynamics for sponsoring today's event. Thank you to all of you who have attended today's webinar live, and those who may be listening to this at some point in the future. We hope you found the presentation enlightening, informative, and educational. We will, as usual, be doing more webinars. You could check on DevOps.com for our schedule, and we hope to see you at those. Anand, if there's nothing else from you, we'll call it a wrap.
No, thank you. It was,
okay.
I think, good questions today.
Thank you. This is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.